We've explored the fun world of Playwright a little bit in previous episodes, but now we're going to go to the source and get really deep into it. Let's mash on that. Hi everybody, and welcome to another episode of the Asp.Net Monsters. In today's episode, we have another special guest with us today. We have Arjun Attam, who is a product manager on the Playwright team, who saw our previous videos about Playwright and decided to set us all straight about all the truths about it. So welcome to the show.
Thank you. Thanks for having me here. I'm super excited.
Thanks for joining us so late. We are traveling across at least 9 time zones, if not 10, to get to you. So thanks for joining us here today.
No, it's great to be here.
Awesome. So tell us all about Playwright. Like, what's the motivation behind it? There's already lots of tools in this space. Why is what you're doing so much better?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think what we've seen in the last few years is web development has really changed. Web development, what it used to be a decade ago, is very different from what it is now. There have been some sort of major shifts. I think if you look at engineering teams today and developers today, they're trying to move faster. They're trying to ship code a lot faster. I think time to market is a term that we use internally, but that really reflects in how teams are building software today. And testing often is the biggest bottleneck for a lot of teams to ship reliably and with speed. When you sort of start looking at these bottlenecks, you start questioning why is testing a bottleneck really? And the fact is that a lot of teams have not been able to automate the testing process for whatever reasons. And the need for automation really is growing because time to market pressures are growing. So that's really number one. The second is, I think the web platform itself has just evolved significantly, right? The applications that we build today are, they're not disjoint pages that, we navigate to. They're really full-blown applications running in the browser, which has now become a really mature, place to build applications, right? You have, all sorts of new APIs. You can use geolocation sensors. You can, do audio-video calls in the browser. And web applications are not just running in the browser, they're also used for native apps, right? Electron apps or mobile apps that are built with web views are all using web technology. So you have essentially a large set of APIs that are being used to build web applications, and these web applications are being deployed everywhere, right? They're running on our desktop, they're running on our phones, they're running inside Android apps, they're running inside Electron apps. And it's just infeasible to be able to actually test this entire breadth, of platforms, right? And that again makes automation important, right? Because there is no way for you to be able to ensure that your responsive design is working as well as it should be on mobile and on desktop. That's number two. The third reason, which I think is actually the most interesting one in my opinion, is that historically, we've actually looked at the testing pyramid as a lot of unit tests and some end-to-end tests, right? And that's worked very well for a lot of people. That's been sort of the standard really. But what's happened over time is our applications have become more distributed, right? We're building microservices. We have large teams being split into smaller pods, building their own parts of applications. And so what's become more important is to actually ensure that the entire set of moving parts are essentially working well together, right? And so there's this general need to actually write, or to put it differently, general need to actually test more broadly, right? Write more end-to-end tests as opposed to unit tests, right? And so we're essentially seeing these three things influence teams to think about automated testing more seriously, and also automated testing at the end-to-end UI level, for their web applications. And I think these three trends are essentially pushing a lot of teams to look for alternatives, look for tools that are faster and reliable. I think browser testing has just had this reputation of being flaky and slow and expensive, and that's really what we're trying to challenge with Playwright, because we feel that there's a large set of teams out there that need reliable, fast, automated web testing. And Playwright is sort of our attempt at fulfilling that need. That's really perhaps a super long elevator pitch, but that's really the problem that we're trying to solve with Playwright.
We had I worked on a project probably about a decade ago where we had we called them golden handcuffs, but it was basically what happened is that the unit tests got so numerous over time, and there was a lot of integration testing and almost end-to-end testing involved in insofar as like invoking things happening that would like trip off APIs and trickle down or whatever. But yeah, golden handcuffs, because sure it was there, but it was impossible to change, and we had 80 to 90 days to get, like, that's what it took to get a bug fix through testing, and we solved that by starting to unwind the unit tests and move them out to tests that we were automating with Selenium and things like that or whatever. And there's a lot of friction through that entire process. And it speaks to a lot of what you're talking about how even 10 years ago, there was evolution happening on the web that is precipitating the changes that's happening today and where things are going today. So why does that free us? Why does it make it better than just unit tests alone, to have that disconnect and to have these two things in balance working the project?
It really depends on how a team's sort of operating. We've seen teams that don't have any unit tests and only have end-to-end tests, right? That's a model that we've seen actually emerge in a way that's sort of been surprising, because unit tests have historically been so important, right? But in a lot of ways, unit tests tend to be super tied to implementation, right? And not and they don't actually communicate the higher level scenario. One of the reasons why the testing pyramid is the way it is because browser tests have been slow and expensive, right? And so just the cost of actually writing a browser test, running a browser test, maintaining a browser test over time has been just expensive, and it would just come in the way of you writing more of them, right? Which is why a lot of the testing was done at the unit level. I think one of the things we keep talking about in the Playwright team is, what would it take for us to make browser tests as reliable, as fast as unit tests, right? And so, we sort of give you the developer experience that you're used to with unit testing, but you're able to get that through browser tests, and that is sort of just asking that question has revealed answers and product decisions that sort of reflect throughout the product, right? I think one of the you've tried Playwright, and so some of these terms might make sense, but one of the basic primitives for Playwright is a browser context and not really a browser, right? Because browsers are expensive, right? And what we've seen is teams have historically had lots of tests that need to run in isolated environments, and so they would spin up browsers, spend a few seconds doing that, spin it down, and everything would just slow down, right? You would essentially add that tax to all of your browser tests, right? But with a browser context, you essentially have this very ephemeral, isolated thing, which is cheap to create and cheap to tear down, right? So you launch an instance once, but then you can create a browser context that follows iPhone emulation because you want to run your mobile tests, and then you create another browser context that actually runs in a different time zone, for example, because you want to test for that particular time zone, right? And so you've been able to sort of essentially get a lot faster dev cycle, a lot faster runtime, which is sort of similar to the unit testing world, but with browser tests, right? And so it's when we talk about the distinction between unit testing and end-to-end testing, we talk about two different orthogonal things, really, right? We're talking about what is the level at which we are testing and what is the experience of that testing, right? And I think the experience is really an axis for us to work on, so as to make browser tests super easy and comfortable to use, just as unit tests, so that the only distinction that teams have to make is on the basis of what do I actually need to test, right? If I'm building a small component, then maybe I can just do a unit test. But if I'm building a full-blown application, then maybe an end-to-end test is the right option. I don't need to be limited. I shouldn't be limited. When I'm deciding this, I shouldn't be limited by what the actual infrastructure can do, right? So that's sort of how we look at the the landscape or distinction between unit and end-to-end testing.
Yeah, it's been moving to the browser test or that end-to-end testing at the higher level has been something that's been hard for me to adopt because of the friction in that space. And so usually what ends up happening is I get good test coverage around the base components that have good testable interfaces right up to the controller level, and then it's just it's a free for all after that, whoever's consuming it.
Yeah, it ends up being a manual thing, right? Instead of being part of your automated testing process. So
And it's
I
always
appreciate
tough
that.
to like stand up the required infrastructure to do it. That like it's not just you need to stand up the browser, you got to stand up an API, and if there's a problem, it's difficult to look at a test and immediately go, this is a problem in the UI, as opposed to, this is a problem in the API.
Right.
So being able to intercept those network calls and fake the responses is really useful. It provides that seam that has been lacking previously in a lot of these platforms.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So should we get you to share your screen and help us out with a demo so we can dive into this?
Yeah, let me actually set some context before that. So, I think what Simon just mentioned is very interesting because, so far, I think we've been talking about just the primitives, right? We've been talking about browsers, browser context, right? Some of these essential building blocks that, you can use to essentially author browser automation, automated browser tests with Playwright. But, what Simon was sort of hinting at is it's not just these primitives, right? There is this sort of end-to-end experience that's problematic, right? Which is to say, when my tests fail, I don't know what broke, right? I don't know if it was my UI or was it the API, right? And so, being able to sort of debug these failures, being able to maintain these tests over time is like a whole new problem area. A lot of our work on the Playwright team so far has been on just the core driver foundation, right? The ability for to use a JavaScript API to be able to automate a browser. And a lot of the work that we're doing now is, shifting gears to simplify debugging, for example, right? I think one of the things that you were demoing in your last video was a video recording feature, right? Which is, which is essentially a way for you to get a visual artifact of what happened so that you can, see what went wrong. And, there's a lot of work that's actually coming in that space. So I'd love to perhaps talk about that on future episodes. But one of the other things that's been, one of the other things that's been hard for browser tests is just authoring them, right? I think getting started with browser automation is hard for it's hard for a whole bunch of reasons, right? I think what we see is we see lots of developers who historically written web applications take on testing responsibilities, right? And so they're coming into testing with completely blank slate, and therefore there's a steep learning curve for them. We're also seeing, folks that are coming from testing backgrounds where, they've sort of, done a lot of manual testing and are now, getting into automation, right? And for them as well, the learning curve for automation tends to be hard. And so to sort of, make that authoring experience easier of actually getting started with Playwright, one of the things that we built out is this thing called Playwright Code Gen. Which is essentially our take on a record and replay tool in the automation space. So with that, I'm just going to share my screen and hopefully give you a quick demo of that. Can you see my screen?
Yes. Yeah.
Awesome. Yeah. So I'm actually inside VS Code right now. And I've created a very, a basic sort of NPM project, which is empty. It doesn't have any files. And I've essentially added two dependencies for myself. One is the Playwright NPM package. This is 1.7, which is something we released this week. I can talk about this new version as well. And this other thing called Playwright CLI. The Playwright CLI is a standalone NPM project package today. But it's actually merging onto Playwright. So, in one of our subsequent iterations, you'll actually not require this project at all. And so, I think your past videos are a good intro to Playwright. I'm going to show you some bits of the Playwright CLI, especially the bits around getting started with automation with the, with the Code Gen tool. So to run CLI, I'm going to pop open my terminal and essentially use npx to essentially start the Playwright CLI tool. Now, first run essentially shows you a helpful summary of what all the Playwright CLI can do. Let's just zoom into some of these commands here. Do you think the font size could be bumped up a little, or is it
No,
clear
I
now?
think it's okay. We can read it here.
Okay.
So yeah. So the thing is people are going to have to really engage with this video, right? Just make it full screen, and they're going to have to just really read and pay attention. It's good.
Awesome. So the CLI essentially can do a bunch of handy utility things, right? It can open a page in a browser, and this is especially useful when you want to sort of debug issues in one of your tests that might be failing. One of the things that I want to highlight here is that Playwright provides WebKit builds for all platforms, right? So you actually have WebKit is the browser engine that's powering Apple Safari, and so with the Playwright WebKit build, you can actually have it running locally on a Windows or a Linux box in headful and headless modes. And with Playwright CLI, you can essentially just open it. So if I was to just open a website, let's try opening the GitHub.com website inside WebKit. I would just do something like WebKit, and then I essentially have WebKit with GitHub open, and I can essentially try it out. This is a handy way to just try out Apple Safari rendering issues on Windows and Linux. The thing I want to zoom into this though in this demo is CodeGen. So CodeGen is our take on record and replay tools. I think historically web automation has had this class of tools where you can record a few actions and then sort of save that file and then replay those actions, and that essentially becomes your test. What we felt and what we heard from users was this need to actually generate code. So that you can actually manipulate and manage your test as code, right? You can commit it to version control. You can do a code review on it. You can use IntelliSense and tweak it as code. And so, what Playwright CodeGen does is that it actually records user actions and then generates code for them. So let's give it a spin. So I'm just going to run Playwright CLI and run it with CodeGen. Once I do that, Playwright would output JavaScript code that essentially launches this browser window, right? So it uses the Playwright API. It launches Chromium in headful mode, right? We can see the UI, and so headless is passed as false. It then creates a browser context, and then it opens a new page in this browser context. I can then do actions in this page, right? So for example, let's go to github.com, and once I do that, you have page.goto written for you. So you don't actually need to learn the API. You don't need to go to our documentation and find out how to navigate a page. That just gets generated for you. The other thing that folks tend to do when they're writing tests is that they need to actually identify UI elements on their screen, right? And so what CodeGen does is that it gives you a nice, handy way to just identify UI elements, right? So for example, if I want to identify this theme element, I want to test, let's say, this theme particular flow, Playwright just shows a helpful sort of under a hover text below the element that says text theme, which means you can actually open this element or refer to this element with its text content. Similarly for the marketplace, right? So let's say if I click on the marketplace, you'll essentially get a page.click here. Now, what I want to call out here, which is actually a major distinction between, let's say, Playwright and other tools in the browser automation space, is that something like page.click does not actually require, a custom wait condition, because these actions are actually waiting for the underlying UI element to be visible, to be ready for click events, to stop animating, and you essentially have all of those checks done for you, automatically. I can do a few more actions. Let's say I click here and I search for Playwright because I want to find the Playwright GitHub action. And so I see two options. One of them is called Playwright Container. The other is called Playwright Tests. Let me try this one. And this is essentially, the Playwright GitHub action page. And to navigate to this page, we essentially have all those steps, being generated here. Now I can copy paste these steps, essentially start my script. Now, this is, our script in JavaScript, right? But Playwright also supports other languages, which means we can actually generate this script in other languages, right? I think one of the other languages that your audience might like is C#. I can essentially pass the target command and say generate this code for C#. And once I do that, you'll actually have the same snippet being generated, with C# code. We have C# bindings for Playwright, and so they're essentially using the C# bindings. You can actually get Playwright sharp on NuGet, to sort of set this up, and it works in the same way. I can navigate to a page, and it'll output that code for me. If I don't like C# and I want to try something else, Playwright is also available in Python, right? Which means I can do target Python and generate Python code. This is essentially using the Playwright repo of the Playwright Python package, and you get the same thing. Just this week, with our Playwright 1.7 release, we also announced Java bindings. These Java bindings have full API coverage of Playwright, and so Java isn't a possible target inside CodeGen, but that's going to come soon. So that you essentially have a way of getting started with browser automation, without having to worry about how that API works internally, or going through some complicated documentation. You can get code in the language of your choice, with the Playwright CLI tool.
Yeah, this is great. I really like how it kind of, well, in terms of discoverability and learning the API, like you said, you don't need to go and read the docs just to get started. This will show you exactly what you need to do to write those initial tests. And it's sure a big improvement. I'm thinking back to, as you said, there these types of recording tools have been around as long as browser automation has been around. And I'm thinking back to like the one that used to be built into Visual Studio that only worked with Internet Explorer and generated a bunch of XML files for you that just didn't work quite as well as this does.
Yeah, I think a lot of the foundational improvements for the driver sort of cascade through. I think a record and replay tool would have been really hard to build if a page short click would not auto wait. Because then the code that you would essentially generate would not actually run. There are still cases where CodeGen can improve. There are certain sites which are hard to sort of figure out with auto waits. And what we've tried to do is ensure that all the primitives are available. You can sort of write a custom wait for if you want to. But CodeGen is constantly evolving to essentially cover as many scenarios as possible. I think the record and replay promise is appealing, but it can be a little hard to deliver. And we definitely see that a lot of the work that's been done on the foundation helps achieve a lot of those goals. And the web is really a complicated, sophisticated place. We see new apps every day that are doing something new, and so it's really a combination of getting started with let's say CodeGen to get comfortable, and then you essentially migrate to core because that's really something that's easily maintainable over time. Like I think our tools have evolved to essentially make sure that we know how to manage code. We know how to add it to our source control. We know how to review it over time, and so the attempt with CodeGen really is to give you the best of both worlds, right? Give you an easy getting started experience and the ability to sort of manipulate code.
Yeah, it's interesting. I'm trying to think of, I'm thinking of like things that might come into this peripherally, probably from the community because it wouldn't be a core feature, but you could actually, if you have a framework with a good API itself, and you understand either the conventions of the application framework, or as I said, there's an API available for it, you'd actually be able to do things like have a service listening to code changes. When a new view is introduced, you could actually like generate a script that would run this, to put this in front of a human to actually go through the CodeGen process on any of the new views or components that are added to a project. So there's a lot of automation opportunities here that kind of are even bigger than just what's in here. But I mean, obviously not the core focus, but there's some really great stuff there that can probably be done. So
yeah, for sure.
So you mentioned that one of the motivations for Playwright was to improve the reliability of automated tests, and like to try to get us to as close as possible, I guess, to like the reliability that we have with writing unit tests. And I'm just wondering where are some places that you see that customers are still struggling with the reliability, like having tests that maybe don't run or maybe not always repeatable. You get different results when you run it multiple times. Where are some areas that you see that still need some improvement, and maybe some tips on how people can work around some of those issues?
Yeah, for sure. So I think the first thing that perhaps is worth highlighting is um, um, when we look at reliability, I think in general browser tests have this the core reason why browser tests have essentially been hard to get predictive or to run predictably is because browser automation frameworks have typically not known the state of the application, right? I think your app might be loading, but then you're trying to do a page.click, and things just go difficult. And so what ends up happening is you're essentially left with the need to actually write a sleep timeout or some sort of a wait condition, so that you are essentially waiting for everything to happen before you do the things that you want to do. And the core difference really between, let's say Playwright and other tools is, Playwright has the ability to actually listen for browser events when they happen, right? So instead of sort of polling using, an HTTP based API, Playwright can actually listen to, things happening in the browser, which is why, it can sort of effectively auto wait for things, right? When I do a page.go and I navigate to github.com, page.go, the promise will only resolve when the navigation has finished and issued a load event on the page, right? And issuing a load event is essentially that is an event that the browser knows, and the browser then tells Playwright this is what happened, right? And so in this sort of realm of browser tests, what Playwright has been able to focus on today is essentially making the communication between your test and the browser reliable, right? Which means you don't need to sleep for 5 seconds. You don't need to sort of rerun your test multiple times. That bit is sort of a bit that has been effectively solved right now. But then, if you look at browser tests, there are lots of things that can go wrong. It might be that, the network is sort of being a little flaky sometimes. It could be that, you're depending on some sort of a third-party API, and that, did not work. In a lot of cases, browser tests end up running in staging environments, which tend to be a little unpredictable in how they function, and so that can also introduce reliability problems. And so a big area for us to actually focus on is helping developers and testers with the tools to be able to actually inspect and identify what went wrong, right? I think network interception, like like you were demoing, is one of the tools in which teams can sort of make their tests more predictable, by essentially like creating this mock layer. But mocking has this downside where, you end up sort of, drifting away, from the actual implementation, right? So we would want teams to be able to sort of test against actual implementation. But in the case of, an unreliable flaky tests, they essentially have tools to be able to actually identify, what went wrong, right? And so this whole question of what went wrong is just a whole new area that is an area of investment for the Playwright team, and that's really a something that we're actively working on. I think you'll see some of those things show up in the next couple of quarters. But I think when we talk about reliability, there are a whole bunch of reasons why tests can be unreliable. And we've been able to solve one part with the driver, but then the overall developer experience of maintaining and debugging your tests for reliability issues is a completely open space.
Well, I'm excited that the Playwright is here to kind of fill this gap. I know there's lots of other tools that have taken different routes to solve this, like some pretty complicated ones. I'm thinking like Test Cafe that set up like an entire web server to proxy requests through. But this feels like an easier and more reliable way to do that. So are there any places that Playwright just like does not work? I know that I've seen some test runners that have problems with things like OAuth flows, where you're redirected out to a different site to put your credentials in and then redirect it back. Does it handle all of those things?
Yeah, for sure. So, one of the distinctions that you can sort of draw in the automation framework space is, automation tools that are actually running in the browser along with your page, right? So you're essentially writing JavaScript that's running in the browser and sort of, bound by the sandbox that JavaScript has, right? Which means you can't actually have a script running in the main page, but interacting with the iframe, because both of those two are, different execution contexts. The other type of tools are, out of process automation drivers, right? Which are sort of, operating with the browser process, with the render process that is powering your pages. And Playwright is an out of process driver, which means, you can actually have, workflows that involve multiple pages. You can have workflows that involve, two different browsers or, different domains. A lot of our users actually have, tests that involve iframes, right? And you need an out of process driver to be able to actually accomplish those tasks. The web is evolving continuously, right? It's constantly evolving, and so you have new things being added, as APIs constantly. I think we've tried to make sure that everything is covered, but then there are a few areas which are just gaps that we want to sort of work on and cover up. I think, for example, service worker support is something that's available in Chromium today, right? And we don't have automation for service workers in Firefox and WebKit. That's on the roadmap and coming soon. We are also adding a helper API for the drag and drop interaction, for example. I think lots of apps that upload files or have a bunch of sort of mouse interactions, you rely on drag and drop. And that's something that we are actively working on. So the driver essentially has this long tail of capabilities, right, which are applicable to certain apps versus and not applicable to others. And so with every release, we are essentially covering up those gaps. In 1.7, for example, which is the release that came out this week, we announced new APIs for loading and saving browser storage. So if you have a browser context that is logged in, you can essentially extract all browser storage, cookies, local storage, and then load that onto a different context so that, you get another context which is authenticated, right? And so, these capabilities, keep coming. And, I think in terms of capabilities, I think Playwright is, far more capable than anything else that's out there, and the design of being an out-of-process driver, helps.
Yeah, I feel like one of the things also that helps is having like an actual company backing this. And I know that I'm going to get scolded by open source advocates and so forth. But traditionally, like things like Selenium and others have kind of rotted, I think, because they haven't had that sort of support. And knowing that there is like actual people working on this that are getting paid to do it and build things, to me is a very compelling case for using this as a framework.
Yeah, I think a lot of the stuff in Playwright is actually thanks to open source contributions. I think the Jest Playwright package is fully developed in the open source by a community of developers who essentially built that, and that's a lot of Playwright users actually end up depending on it. So, I don't think, Playwright would have been where it is today without actually the support from the larger sort of open source community. But I completely get your point. I think, it's hard to be able to sort of, run an open source project without backing and I'm actually quite delighted to see, some of the new stuff that GitHub has been launching for, sponsorships. I think that sort of, creates new incentive models, for tools that are actually built by, a broader community, as opposed to like companies.
Yeah, there's certainly a value, well, there has to be a value there in terms of the ongoing development, having it supported somehow. And I think that the longer play, you're right, the opportunity to do sponsorship on a project that you care about and want to see succeed, and if it's popular enough, it'll gain some traction. But for right now, until that becomes the norm for developers as they adopt library packages, it's kind of funny because we used to ship products, and then people would pay us for them, and then that kept our company going. And we're kind of inverting the model now. We're giving all of the source code out there and saying, if you want me to keep developing it, then send a little bit of money over. So there's a shift in the open source space, but having, and I mean, to anybody who would argue that Microsoft might, we've been talking lately about how we don't see as often anymore people spelling Microsoft with a $ in the word. But I mean, we're sitting here today talking with a Microsoft PM on a project that leverages open source, running, a node, having a node session running here inside of an open source version of Visual Studio that's running on a Mac. So, I mean, I think we're in a different world right now, and it's a good place to be.
Yeah, it's very exciting. So thank you so much for taking some time out of your day, especially this late at night, to come and talk to us. And I know that we're going to be following development in the Playwright space closely. And hopefully some of our listeners, viewers, are also interested in it. So if you are out there watching this, remember to like, comment, share, do whatever the cool kids are doing on the YouTube today. Pretend that you're 14 so that you can comment on videos. And we'll see everybody on next week's episode.
Bye.
Cheers.
Thank you.